Passes. File item 78, AB 254. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 254 by Assembly Member Roger Hernandez and others, an act relating to elections.
Mr. Hernandez.
Mr. Speaker and members, AB 254 limits the established election dates to June and November of even and odd years. By consolidating elections, AB 254 will help avoid standalone or off-cycle local elections. Standalone elections have shown to decrease voter turnout, increase cost per voter, and encourage special interest influence. A healthy democracy is based on civic participation. Over the last 3 decades, multiple national studies have shown election timing is one of the strongest indicators of voter turnout. Elections that are held off-cycle at times other than June or November have very low voter turnout, and they can give voters the idea that the elections are going on constantly. This results in voter fatigue. Consolidated elections have shown a benefit of up to 54% increased voter participation and savings up to $50.94 per voter, according to the Green Lining Institute. High voter turnout is integral to a healthy democracy. Stable and consistent election times will help build positive voting habits and make elections more accessible. That's why I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Ridley Thomas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I rise in support of AB 254. It came through the Elections Committee. It's a part of trying to increase turnout. Basic things that we can do that will encourage voter participation, have equal representation, equal access to the ballot box, and have a representative of a community, make sure that they rather allow for a community to have a representative of their choosing and have the most representative elected bodies that we can. There have been continuing concern from various local governments. I'm pleased that the gentleman from Covina has worked very closely with those who have concerns about the bill. I'm sure that that work will continue. And with those points, I would strongly urge an aye vote of this body. Thank you.
Mr. Calderon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm proud to stand before you as a principal co-author of this bill, which will streamline our local elections and eliminate voter confusion when elections are held. This last November, California set a record with only 42.42% of eligible voters actually going to the polls. To put that in context, the previous record was set 13 years ago when 50.6% of voters actually ended up voting. We have a lot of work to do to improve participation in our great democracy, a democracy that is only as strong as the people who choose to be involved. AB 254 is a step in the right direction, and let's be honest, we already make it difficult enough. This bill allows us an opportunity to streamline our elections, to make being able to participate in government a little bit less confusing and less cumbersome. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Alejo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I also rise as chair of the Latino Caucus in support of AB 278, as it's one of our priority bills also for this year. Legislation designed to bring a fair, equitable, and balanced approach to local elections. This bill will ensure that voters no longer feel disenfranchised by local at-large elections that have a history of marginalizing voters based on race, color, and membership in a minority group. This bill will improve voter confidence in our local municipalities by ensuring that stronger accountability exists for local residents, and also that local voters no longer feel that their at-large elections officials are unresponsive to the local neighborhood needs as voters. No longer will voters have to question if their at-large elected official is properly considering their geographic area or is properly ensuring the even distribution of city resources. AB 278 will bring California one step closer to implementing a fair and equitable local elections process. And we all know the stories of our local neighborhoods with the history of voter disenfranchisement. I have a similar story in 1988 in this case of Gomez versus the city of Watsonville that was fought in the 9th District Court, brought this very issue to the forefront and set a landmark case on this issue under the federal statute. The demographics of Watsonville includes a majority of Latino population from lower economic...
Point of order. What's your point of order, Mr. Wagner?
The member referenced AB 270 and is giving a very impassioned argument, but I don't believe he's speaking to this bill.
Again, I ask all speakers to speak on the merits of the bill that is at hand. Point well taken. With that, Mr. Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. If folks want an election in Los Angeles or Los Angeles County to be during an even year, you should probably just simply ask the Board of Supervisors of Los Angeles City Council to make that decision. Instead, we're making yet another cram down of how locals are supposed to run their elections. Locals should be able to make decisions in how to run their elections. Simply ask them rather than cramming it down.
Mr. Wagner.
Mr. Speaker, briefly on this bill, what I would like to say is that the author's goal of increasing participation is no doubt laudable. The problem is that the bill may not actually get us there for two reasons. One is that the effect will necessarily be longer ballots in those jurisdictions that now are forced to have their local elections at the same time as a primary or general election. And we all know the results of voter fatigue as you go down longer and longer ballots. As you get to the end of the ballots, we all know this, the participation rate tends to fall off. So while you may have actually more voters in the polls, there is nothing that says you will actually get more folks paying attention to those races and actually voting on those races. Second of all, as my colleague from Huntington Beach just pointed out, this is a matter of local control. There are very legitimate reasons why a locality would decide, in fact, to hold a special, its own elections in an off cycle, and that has to do with cost. In our analysis, a city council member is quoted as saying, and I won't read it, I'll only paraphrase, I don't know whether it's in a letter of opposition, I don't know whether it's in a newspaper article where they got it, but the point being made is that in these local city elections that are held in these off-cycled times, you're not, as a candidate, competing against a clutter of other ballot initiatives, a clutter of other candidates. You're not competing against presidents and presidential candidates and senators and Senate candidates and congressional candidates who buy up all the airtime, who kind of suck the electoral oxygen out of the jurisdiction. Rather, they have an opportunity at a better price to break through, get their message out, and encourage the voters to come out and to vote. That's the reason you would have an election in an off cycle. Certainly that's a legitimate reason that some of our local cities and counties could make the decision for themselves, rather than have us mandate, could make the decision for themselves that it is better for them and the electoral process to allow these candidates to run cheaper off-cycle campaigns. The inevitable effect of this bill will be to lengthen the ballot, create voter fatigue, and benefit the well-heeled candidates for these local offices. Maybe somebody like a member of this House who wants to go back to local government versus the other candidates who are kind of getting a start up from the grassroots. So it's an incumbent protection. It's a big money protection, not intended, but that is the effect of this bill. It is that sort of a measure that tramples on local control, and for those reasons, as laudable as the goal is, and it is, I urge a no vote on this one.
Mr. Cooley, you're recognized.
Colleagues, I regret I rise in opposition. My mic was up before I heard from my colleague from Irvine. But I want to say I have this same view that when we get in June and November in the big statewide election years, there is so much mail, so much TV, so much everything. And the ability for someone who's trying to break into local government as an individual to kind of get their voice heard, to stand out in the local crowd, it is so hard to crack that wall of communication and to do it at an affordable level. So I do think that there are some unintended consequences that we need to reflect upon here in terms of how we permit people to break into the political realm, to grow their voice, to grow their visibility, to do so in an economic way, which is how we bring forward people in this democracy. So at this moment, I will not be supporting this bill, and I just think that there's some significant ramifications of jamming all of these races through these two limited windows every other year. I just think that has pitfalls.
Mr. Patterson, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, members, I rise too to oppose this bill. Being the mayor of Fresno for 8 years, we ran two very important school bonds. And part of the discussion and part of the rationale for the success of the school bonds was that we were able and free to decide when that election would be, whether it be in the June and November, and our decisions had to do with the ability for us to stand alone and clear and earn the vote of the electorate for these expenditures. And those were the days when you needed to get to 66 2/3%. Taking away that choice to decide where to place your election based on the willingness to run that election in a time where we think we can be in the spotlight, alone in the voting universe, and that presents a very clear path to an election victory for some very important things. I doubt, had we loaded those elections up with the large ballots in the June or November, I doubt they would have been passed. And without it, we probably would have lost billions of dollars worth of school investment. So I must, for that reason, ask for your no vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Assemblymember Hernandez, you may close.
Mr. Speaker, just to address some of the concerns that were raised, with regards to the concerns raised by my colleague from Fresno concerning special elections, this bill will not prohibit the placement of a special election regarding a special bond, school board, municipal bond, fire district bond. This bill would not prohibit that. They will still be permissible whenever this local agency would want them to take place. This bill really follows the lead of what a low turnout, very conservative voter turnout in the city of Los Angeles said when asked, do you want to consolidate elections to improve voter turnout? Do you want to save costs and not have so many elections that we have voter fatigue? And resoundingly, I think in the 70-some-odd percentile, voters in LA City, that just happens to be the second largest city in America, said with a 76% turnout, said yes. I think this is good for Californians. I think we should not be afraid of bigger turnouts. Bigger turnouts means we have more representative voices of our state telling us what they want, when they want it. And we've seen that in our elections. That's why we have diversity here. We get elected in the bigger turnout elections, the even year elections. This is what this bill is striving to do. Respond to the turnouts that have the greatest number of Californians participating. Let's not be afraid of their voice and their determination. That's why I ask for your aye vote.
The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 43, noes 26. Measure passes. File item 79, AB 278. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 278 by Assemblymember Roger Hernandez and others, an act relating to elections.
Assemblymember Hernandez.
Mr. Speaker and members, Assembly Bill 278 requires cities with a population of 100,000 or more to elect members to the City Council by district. I introduced Assembly Bill 278 to bring needed reform to the election process. District-based elections offer several benefits. Each geographic area is represented, which helps ensure an even distribution of city resources. While each voter is represented by all city council members, each voter has one specific council member to petition to for help. Every neighborhood will have a voice on their city council, a voice of someone who lives, shops, worships, entertains, walks the streets through these neighborhoods, and is knowledgeable of the ins and outs and particulars of those neighborhoods. The Voting Rights Act was passed 50 years ago, a historic policy change that brought hope to the disenfranchised voter. Yet we encounter instances where either by design or by resistance, communities across our state still face challenges as they exercise their right to vote. By electing council members at large, you create a system in which one community is empowered over the needs over others. Also, it becomes cost prohibitive for many local leaders to run an effective campaign citywide. As many of you know, I have introduced election reform legislation every session that I have been in the Assembly. I feel strongly about the need to ensure that every citizen and every community has a voice. It is important to note that the fact that at-large elections have been the subject of litigation across our state that challenges this election process as a violation of both the state and federal Voting Rights Act. Voters in numerous cities, including Anaheim, Compton, Palmdale, Watsonville, have gone to court to discard the at-large election system. These lawsuits have cost cities over millions of dollars. AB 278 is a more cost-effective way to uphold voting rights in our local communities. Relief for our communities will take a long time if we wait for the judicial system, and will be very costly and very expensive for cities and legal costs. AB 278 provides an opportunity to remedy this problem and to have adherence to the Voting Rights Act. Members, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Mays, you're recognized.
Thank you, Speaker and members. I rise in strong opposition to this bill. I know some of you, like I, served on local city councils or local boards. And in the Inland Empire, I can tell you, when I look at examples of cities that were successful and cities that were not successful, the most successful cities were those ones that were at-large elections. I can think of a couple of cities that have gone through deep financial hardship in the Inland Empire, specifically in San Bernardino County, that were district-based elections, and those cities have failed. And they failed because the governing board, the members of that governing board, their city council, were making decisions based on the best interests of their districts and not on the best interests of the city at large. This is wrong. It's not a good policy, and it's unfortunate to think that if this bill passes, that we're going to have cities that are broken and not governed properly. I urge a no vote.
Mr. Alejo, you're recognized.
I just want to substitute my previous comments for the correct bill. I was one bill too early last time, a little too excited, but nonetheless, it's still a good bill. It's still a Latino caucus priority, and we should all support this bill. But the one thing I did want to say in response to my colleague from Yucca Valley is that if you were strongly against this bill, then you're against the very system that got you elected to come and represent your constituents here in Sacramento. 80 districts is district elections to ensure that every part of the state has a representative representing your constituents here in Sacramento. In some cities, it meant that you didn't have 3 council members living in the same neighborhood. Moving to district elections ensured that every sector of that city, whether it was poor or whether it was affluent, had representation. Somebody who would go back and home to that neighborhood, look at the street lights, look at the deteriorating streets, look at the lack of parks and sidewalks. That's how powerful district elections is, that every part of your community has somebody represented and addressing the concerns of the constituents. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Assemblymember Gonzalez.
I rise in support of this legislation, and I just want to point out, it's, to my colleague from the Inland Empire, I suppose if you're part of a majority, that a city or an area does feel well governed, despite individual neighborhoods or areas not having adequate representation. And we come from, quite frankly, in San Diego County, if you look at cities who historically had 20 or 30% Latino populations, 40% Latino populations, and never able to even elect somebody who lived in the very neighborhoods that were underserved and underutilized, that were disenfranchised, quite frankly, until we had to sue. It happened in Escondido. We had to sue. We should not have to go city by city through California to ensure that we have adequate representation for every community within that city. Too often, all of the representatives come from one area. Unfortunately, sometimes a more engaged area, a wealthier area, many times a wider area. So although it may feel very good if you're part of that majority, I would say that this is an important issue for those of us who are in a substantial minority but still need representation on these cities. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Harper, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Like the previous bill, this bill again represents a cram down of state policy down on local decision makers. The reality is, if you want to decide how a city is composed, ask the city council, ask the voters, have a petition in that particular city for to be able to make a decision. That's where the decision should be made. For those who said we got elected under this system, the reality is our system of having 80 districts in the Assembly and 40 districts in the State Senate were adopted by the voters of the state of California through constitutional amendment and constitutional adoption. If you want a local city to make such a decision, the local city council or the local voters or the local school board should be the decision maker on the issue. It's as simple as that. However, I want to point out that this move to try to district special elections within local districts, it really smacks of trying to redistribute the voters and machine your way through local cities. The reality is in this body, there are some people who are elected by twice as many voters or more than twice as many voters as some others. And by doing that at the local level, you disproportionate representation in a particular city.
Mr. Gomez, you're recognized.
Thank you so much. I rise in support of this important measure. It's a measure that has constantly been held in the Appropriations Committee over the last several years. But I felt very that it was an important discussion to continue to the floor and then continue through the legislative process. I know this is it's a passionate issue, and reasonable people can disagree on both sides. But I do believe that in an at-large city, it does become, the individuals elected become less accountable to all and different parts of the city. So we want to make sure that this will allow an individual and groups of individuals within a city to actually have some influence. I represent an unincorporated part. This is an extreme example, but it's an example. Unincorporated part of East Los Angeles, 138,000 people. They don't have a city, and their closest elected official is a county supervisor that represents 2 million people. Extreme example. But that 138,000 people will never, ever outvote a county supervisor. And there are some sections in some cities where the neighborhoods will never, ever be able to outvote and vote out an elected official that has consistently ignored their needs. This is a way to kind of create a more accountable elected official structure within cities. And I think it's something that we should pass, and it's something that we should, it is due our support on this floor. So I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Ridley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I rise in support of the measure. The gentleman from Covina has brought a few bills forward today that have helped us think about the modern election system and if we want to be more inclusive and more representative or not, whether it be the date of the election or the particular district. We know that voices are often not heard in these elections, and many of the previous speakers have spoken to that fact. In my opinion and in the opinion of the Elections Committee, this was a meritorious proposal that should move forward. Not unlike the previous proposal that the gentleman brought forward, it is likely that if this is to make it to the governor's desk, that there will have to be amendments because there are concerns in many ways with this change. But change can sometimes bring about good things, and I think it's frankly neutral because it will impact various communities various ways, and in positive ways. And it's not partisan in its outcome. It'll help various parties and various ethnic groups. So this is a proposal that should move forward, and I would strongly encourage this body to adopt the measure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Cooley, you're recognized.
Colleagues haven't commented on the prior measure. I just stand in support of this one, and I support it here as I did in the Local Government Committee.
Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This microphone just keeps automatically just coming up. I can't. Let's try to be a little bit of history with respect to the city of Fresno. I rise in opposition. Resident in Fresno since 1968. Mayor from 1993 to 2002 under a district system. Prior to that district system, Fresno was elected, had its members elected at large. 5 members. 2 of them, one Jim Williams, an African American, and 2 Leonel Alvarado, Hispanic, in at-large elections in a very large city. I can only report to you that the city, under that form of election, in fact, ran smoother, with less controversy, with more things getting done than when the city of Fresno went to district elections. It chopped up the city. It created pockets of conflict, threw those pockets of conflict into the city council, And as a result, Fresno went through some very serious wrestling matches that I think were antithetical to the intentions of those who would like to have the district elections. So our experience is an experience that really says there are some cities that can elect at large, and they can elect minorities, and they can function smoothly. Leave it to the local jurisdiction and the people to decide how they want to govern themselves.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Assemblymember Hernandez, you may close.
Mr. Speaker, I want to first and foremost thank my colleagues for their words of support, words of encouragement, and for those that see the world a little differently, I want to say thank you for your input as well. I know for the more conservative members here, there's often an argument that we ought to allow local government to be local, to be more locally driven. And that's what district-based elections is all about, is to make sure that we bring government closer to the people and the people closer to their government representative. Too many communities have gone with decades and decades on decades where members where there's not been representation from their side of the tracks, where for generations where they've been able to say no one has ever been elected from this side of Azusa or from this side of Whittier Boulevard. These realities exist in many communities up and down the state of California, and with these realities, unfortunately, also have existed inequalities, a lack of fairness, and unjust appropriations of resources. I ask all of you to think about bringing government closer to the people, giving local government more control, and particularly the people that elect that local government, the people, our bosses. I ask for your aye vote.
The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 42, noes 29. The measure passes. Colleagues, I've been asked to note that at this time we are halfway through the file. We have a lot more items to go through. I want to thank you for your help in moving through the file expeditiously. With that, we will go to file item 80, AB 282. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 282 by Assemblymember Eggman, and act relating to window coverings.
Assemblymember Eggman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, AB 282 protects children from the preventable strangulation hazard posed by cords on window coverings. We know that there are, historically, for a long time, we know that there are certain window blinds that provide strangulation risks for children. The Commission has investigated 285 incidents from 1996 to 2012, 184 of which involved a fatality amongst young children. I was motivated to introduce this bill when I had constituents come to me who had triplets, and one of their triplets, despite everything they had done and following instructions to keep that child safe, one of them was killed by strangulation by a window cord covering. AB 282 will go far in helping young children by eliminating the danger posed by these corded window coverings. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 45, noes 23. The measure passes. Going to file item 81, AB 302. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 302 by Assemblymember Cristina Garcia, and act relating to pupil services.
Assemblymember Cristina Garcia, you may open.
AB 302 would specify that schools with one or more lactating students shall provide these students with access to a private, secure room to deal with any needs associated with breastfeeding or expressing milk. This bill leaves flexibility for the schools to find the solution that best meets the mothers' and schools' needs and allows schools to use existing facilities. This bill also helps remove barriers and gives more choices for young moms to continue with their education. Students should not have to choose between being a good student and being a good mother. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 50, noes 15. The measure passes.